What happens when you're the last man standing in a war that's already been lost? When every brother you've sworn loyalty to is behind bars, every operation you've built is compromised, and the hunters are closing in with nowhere left to run. April 8th, 2025, Howick, Auckland. The quiet suburban streets of East Auckland are shattered by the sound of police sirens as the National Organized Crime Group descends on a modest residence. Inside, a 36-year-old man, the national vice president of one of the most feared motorcycle gangs in the world, realizes that his time as a free man is over. But this wasn't just another drug arrest. This was the capture of the last remaining Comanchero leader, not facing criminal charges. The final piece in a puzzle that would complete the systematic destruction of an international criminal empire that had spread its tentacles across two nations. The Comancheros, a name that strikes fear into the hearts of rivals and commands respect from those who understand the brutal world of outlaw motorcycle gangs. Founded in Sydney, Australia, they had evolved from a motorcycle club into a transnational organized crime syndicate, with operations spanning methamphetamine importation, cocaine trafficking, money laundering, and violence for hire. But their expansion into New Zealand would prove to be both their greatest opportunity and their ultimate downfall. What started as 501 deportees from Australia seeking new territory became a criminal invasion that would attract the unwavering attention of New Zealand law enforcement. For years, the Comancheros had operated with impunity, moving millions of dollars worth of drugs between Auckland and Christchurch, laundering money through legitimate businesses, and building an empire that seemed untouchable. Their president, Pasilika Naufahu, had declared that the Comancheros saw themselves as the #1 gang in this country. But empires built on violence and drugs have a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention, and in New Zealand, that attention came in the form of the most comprehensive organized crime investigation in the country's history, one that would take down nearly every member of the organization and leave their leadership in ruins. This is the story of how the last free Comanchero fell, and why his arrest marked the end of an era in New Zealand's criminal underworld. Chapter 1. The Deportee Invasion. To understand how the Comancheros rose to power in New Zealand, we need to go back to 2016. That's when Australia's tough Section 501 deportation policy began sending convicted criminals back to their countries of birth. Since 2015, more than 3,000 people have been deported from Australia under the so-called 501 grounds of bad character. Among them were hardened criminals, gang members, and men who had spent decades building criminal networks across Australia's underworld. One of those deportees was Pasilika Naufahu, who had been a sergeant-at-arms for the Comancheros in Australia before being sent to New Zealand in 2016. Naufahu wasn't just another deportee. He was a man with vision, connections, and the ruthless ambition needed to build a criminal empire from scratch. Pasilika Naufahu is the president of the Comanchero Motorcycle Club in New Zealand. He was a sergeant-at-arms for the Comancheros in Australia before being deported here as a 501 in 2016. Naufahu understood something that many failed deportees didn't. New Zealand wasn't a punishment, it was an opportunity. The local criminal landscape was dominated by traditional gangs like the Mongrel Mob and Black Power, but there was room for a more sophisticated, internationally connected organization. The Comancheros brought something new to New Zealand's criminal world: global connections, advanced money laundering techniques, and access to the Mexican drug cartels that were flooding the Pacific with methamphetamine and cocaine. A New Zealand chapter of the Comancheros gang was established in 2018 after members were deported from Australia. But this wasn't just another motorcycle club setting up shop. This was the establishment of a New Zealand cell of an international criminal organization with resources and connections that dwarfed anything the local gangs could offer. The Comancheros didn't just compete with existing gangs. They redefined what organized crime could look like in New Zealand. But Naufahu's vision would come at a cost. The more successful the Comancheros became, the more attention they attracted from New Zealand police, who were beginning to understand that they weren't dealing with a local gang problem. They were facing an international organized crime invasion. Chapter 2. Building the Empire. By 2019, the Comancheros had established themselves as a major player in New Zealand's drug trade. Unlike the traditional gangs that operated through violence and intimidation, the Comancheros brought a corporate approach to criminal enterprise. He was arrested in police gang raids in 2019, which also netted more than $3.7 million in assets, including luxury cars, motorbikes. The 2019 raids, part of Operation Nova, gave New Zealand police their first real glimpse into the scope of the Comancheros' operations. This wasn't street-level drug dealing. This was sophisticated organized crime involving millions of dollars in assets, international money laundering, and supply chains that stretched from Mexico to New Zealand. But the most chilling discovery was what the Comancheros were doing with their profit. Police will allege that these funds were being used to carry out military-styled training of 15 of its members by a trainer brought into the country for this purpose. The Comancheros weren't just importing drugs, they were importing military expertise and training their members for warfare. This wasn't about controlling street corners or traditional gang territories. This was about building a paramilitary organization capable of challenging the authority of the state itself. The commission system showed the sophisticated organizational structure the Comancheros had imported from Australia. It is alleged there would be a $5,000 commission on every kilogram sold by their members. Every drug transaction generated revenue that flowed up to the organization's leadership, funding expansion, weapons purchases, and the military training that was turning gang members into soldiers. Police allege the Comancheros were operating as an organized criminal group, conducting a complex money laundering operation, drug importation and supply operations, and a commission scheme to fund, amongst other things, military-style training for some of its members. But the Comancheros' greatest strength, their international connections and sophisticated operations, would also prove to be their greatest vulnerability. The more complex their operations became, the more evidence they generated, and New Zealand police were watching, learning, and building cases that would bring down the entire organization. The network expands. The Comancheros' success in Auckland encouraged them to expand their operations throughout New Zealand. By 2024, they had established chapters in multiple cities, with their Christchurch operation becoming particularly sophisticated and profitable. An 8-month police investigation, called Operation Avon, alleged the gang organized for drugs and cash to be relayed between Auckland and Christchurch every few weeks. Detective Inspector Darren Thompson said police believed $15 million worth of drugs were moved between the North and South Island. Operation Avon revealed the industrial scale of the Comancheros' drug trafficking operations. This wasn't occasional smuggling. This was a regular supply chain moving massive quantities of methamphetamine and cocaine on a schedule that would make legitimate businesses envious. The prosecution will allege this group is responsible for supplying more than 60 kilos of Class A drugs during the investigation phase. Our investigation showed that they were bringing from the North Island down to South 4 kilos a fortnight. And to give you some idea, that's 1.4 million street value every fortnight. But the Comancheros weren't just moving drugs, they were building a complete criminal infrastructure. August 29, 2024. 18 men, aged between 18 and 55, were arrested and have appeared in court in Christchurch and Auckland. 12 were in Christchurch and 6 were in Auckland. The arrests were the culmination of Operation Avon, and they demonstrated the reach and sophistication of the Comancheros' Christchurch network. Every patched member of the Christchurch chapter was arrested, a clean sweep that effectively decapitated the organization's South Island operations. Charges included participating in an organized criminal group, conspiracy to supply methamphetamine, and conspiracy to supply cocaine. The charges painted a picture of an organization that wasn't just dealing drugs, but operating as a criminal corporation with defined roles, responsibilities, and profit-sharing arrangements. Police also seized 5 kilograms of Class A drugs, 11 firearms, ammunition, about $250,000 cash. 11 vehicles and an Auckland property were also seized. As part of enforcement activity, police have also restrained $1.9 million of assets, consisting of an Auckland property and 11 vehicles. The seizures represented more than just evidence. They were the physical manifestation of a criminal empire that had grown from nothing to control millions of dollars in assets in just a few years. But the arrests in Christchurch were just the beginning. The investigation was revealing connections that stretched far beyond New Zealand's borders. Chapter 4: International Connections. While New Zealand police were dismantling the Comancheros' domestic operations, their Australian counterparts were uncovering connections that revealed the true scope of the organization's international activities. November 30, 2024, Queensland, Australia. The AFP will allege one of the men arrested on Saturday night was the vice president of the Comanchero Outlaw Motorcycle Club's Brisbane chapter. The arrest was part of Australia's largest ever cocaine seizure, 2.34 tons of cocaine worth approximately $760 million. The operation, codenamed Operation Tyrandor, revealed the Comancheros' connections to South American drug cartels and their role in one of the most sophisticated drug importation schemes ever uncovered. Authorities allege the group attempted to import the drugs into Queensland by sea. AFP Commander Stephen Jay said authorities had been tracking the vessel allegedly sent to pick the drugs up from a mothership in international waters, hundreds of kilometers off the Queensland coast. The operation demonstrated the Comancheros' evolution from a motorcycle club to a key player in international drug trafficking. They weren't just buying drugs from cartels. They were partners in sophisticated maritime smuggling operations that spanned continents. As the vessel returned to the Queensland coast, it suffered mechanical issues and broke down, triggering a coordinated police action. The mechanical failure that led to the arrests was more than just bad luck. It was the moment when years of police surveillance and intelligence gathering finally paid off. Each person has been charged with conspiracy to import 2.34 tons of cocaine into Australia. The charges represented the largest drug importation conspiracy in Australian history, and they revealed the Comancheros' central role in supplying drugs to both Australian and New Zealand markets. But the Australian arrests were just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Back in New Zealand, police were building cases against the remaining Comanchero leadership, including the man who would prove to be their most elusive target, the national vice president, who had managed to avoid arrest while his organization crumbled around him. Chapter 5: The net closes. By early 2025, the situation for the remaining free Comanchero leaders was becoming desperate. Police Commissioner Andrew Coster says cumulatively 137 charges have been laid against the gang's members and associates. Those charged include 17 office holders, 10 patched members, and 14 prospects of the gang. Nearly every member of the organization was either in custody, facing charges, or under investigation. The empire that Pasilika Naufahu had built was being dismantled piece by law enforcement agencies that had learned to work together across international borders. But one man remained free, and his freedom represented an ongoing threat to the success of the entire investigation. The national vice president, a 36-year-old man who had managed to stay one step ahead of law enforcement while his fellow leaders were arrested around him. Police were building cases that connected him to multiple drug importation operations, including a methamphetamine importation at the port of Tauranga in December 2024 and cocaine importations that had flooded New Zealand with millions of dollars worth of drugs. The port of Tauranga had become a key focus of the investigation. Since 2020, Customs has seized more than 5,167 kilograms worth of cocaine and 6,241 kilograms of methamphetamine at our borders. The statistics revealed the port of Tauranga as a critical entry point for drugs destined for New Zealand markets, and intelligence suggested that the Comancheros were key players in many of the importation schemes that had been disrupted there. But building cases against sophisticated criminals requires more than just drug seizures. It requires evidence of conspiracy, organization, and the kind of detailed intelligence work that can take years to develop. New Zealand police were patient, methodical, and determined to ensure that when they moved against the last free Comanchero leader, their case would be unshakable. The investigation was approaching its climax, and the man who thought he had escaped the fate of his fellow Comancheros was about to discover that in the modern world of international law enforcement cooperation, there is nowhere to hide.
A transnational organised crime syndicate is alleged to have attempted to bring in 2.34 tonnes of cocaine into Australia over the weekend. 11 men and 2 juveniles have been arrested in the joint operation between the Australian Federal Police and Queensland Police Service. Now, that includes the alleged Vice President of the Comancheros Brisbane chapter and another chapter member. The group allegedly tried to bring in the drugs.
April 8, 2025, Howick, Auckland. The quiet East Auckland suburb that had become home to the last free Comanchero leader was about to become the scene of his downfall. The gang's national vice president was arrested in the Auckland suburb of Howick yesterday. The 36-year-old was charged over an investigation into the importation of methamphetamine at the port of Tauranga last December, and the importation of cocaine into the country earlier this year. The arrest was the culmination of a years-long investigation that had connected the vice president to multiple drug importation operations. This wasn't a street-level drug dealer being caught with a few grams. This was the arrest of a senior organized crime figure connected to multi-million-dollar international drug trafficking operations. It will be alleged that this man played a significant role in working across transnational organized criminal groups with these importations. Police Assistant Commissioner Investigations Paul Basham said. The language was carefully chosen, but devastating in its implications. Transnational organized criminal groups meant connections to international drug cartels. Significant role meant leadership responsibilities. This wasn't just another gang member. This was a key player in operations that spanned continents. Every member of the gang's leadership is now facing serious charges, he said. This is a significant milestone and represents years of relentless investigative work to disrupt and hold the Comancheros to account for criminal activity. The arrest completed a process that had taken years to accomplish. From Pasilika Naufahu's initial arrest in 2019 to the destruction of the Christchurch chapter to the international cooperation that brought down the Brisbane vice president, law enforcement had systematically dismantled every level of the organization. The 36-year-old gang leader appeared in Auckland District Court on Wednesday, charged with importing meth at the port of Tauranga in December, and for his link to cocaine imported earlier this year. He also faced a charge of participating in an organized crime group. As the last Comanchero leader sat in custody awaiting trial, the full scope of what had been accomplished became clear. This investigation represents the single biggest blow to the Comancheros' operations since Operation Nova. But the human cost was equally staggering. Pasilika Naufahu, the man who had built the Comancheros' New Zealand empire, remained behind bars with a statutory release date of July 2028. The parole board has twice refused early release for Naufahu because he is still considered too high risk to be in the community. Naufahu continued to deny his involvement in drug dealing and confirmed he would continue to be involved in the gang, although he claimed he would obey any orders made by the parole board. His refusal to abandon the organization that had destroyed his life exemplified the twisted loyalty that defined the outlaw motorcycle world. Board Chairman Sir Ron Young said it was pointed out that Naufahu had the responsibility of caring for young children, and that appeared to conflict with the fact of his significant involvement in money laundering and conspiracy to supply drugs. Today, the Comancheros exist in New Zealand only as a memory and a warning. Their president remains in prison, their leadership is scattered across multiple countries facing serious charges, and their operations have been completely dismantled by law enforcement. The investigation revealed how quickly sophisticated criminal organizations could establish themselves in new territories, but it also demonstrated the power of sustained, coordinated law enforcement when properly resourced and supported. From the moment the gang established a presence in this country, they made it very clear they saw themselves as the #1 gang in this country. Their ambition had been their strength, but ultimately it became their downfall as it attracted the sustained attention of every law enforcement agency in New Zealand. The last arrest in Howick marked the end of an era. The age of untouchable international motorcycle gangs operating with impunity in New Zealand was over. The fall of the Comancheros serves as a warning to any criminal organization that believes modern borders offer protection from justice. In an age of international cooperation and sophisticated intelligence sharing, there is nowhere to hide and no operation too complex to unravel. The 36-year-old man who thought he was the last free rider discovered what his imprisoned brothers already knew. The road to criminal empire always ends in the same place: handcuffs, courtrooms, and prison cells. The Comancheros learned too late that in the modern world, every connection that makes you powerful also makes you vulnerable. Every encrypted message can be decoded, every financial transaction can be traced, and every victory just makes you a bigger target. Their empire is over, their brotherhood is broken, and their legacy is a cautionary tale about the price of choosing crime over community.